The Bible. It's 66 books of history, stories, letters, and poetry that fit together to form God's one big story. The epic adventure of how He created us and loves us so much that He made a way to rescue us. As we travel through the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, we discover people who met God and found their lives changed forever. And now for an amazing story, inspired by the book of Exodus, chapters 3 to 7.
Even though God's people, the Israelites, were slaves in Egypt, God heard their cries for help. And He had a plan to work through a man named Moses, who was also an Israelite who had actually grown up in Pharaoh's palace. But after making a terrible mistake, Moses fled Egypt. And he lived in Midian, where he raised his family and cared for his sheep, certain that his life in Egypt was long finished.
80 years old. Or maybe it's time for me to retire and live the quiet life. Well, yes, I suppose that is what I'm already doing. No, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with hanging out with sheep all day. Just keep climbing. There's better grass a little further up the mountainside. Oh, no.
Just ahead, a bush burst into flames, and Moses stared in amazement.
It's not burning up.
As Moses edged closer, a voice called from the midst of the fire.
Moses, Moses, here I am. Don't come any closer. Take off your sandals. The place you are standing is holy ground.
Moses stopped in his tracks. With shaking fingers, he tugged off his sandals.
I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
At these words, Moses covered his face in awe.
I have seen how my people are suffering in Egypt, so I have come down to save them. I will bring them to a good land. So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh. I want you to bring the Israelites out of Egypt.
Moses dropped down to his knees, face to the ground.
Me? I will be with you. But what if the Israelites don't believe you sent me?
God gave Moses several miraculous signs to show the Israelites. In fact, right then and there, He took Moses' walking stick and turned it into a snake, and then back into a stick.
Phew.
Still, Moses was frozen with fear.
Lord, I'm a terrible speaker in front of people. Go. I will help you speak. Couldn't you send someone else? Your brother Aaron can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you. Tell him what to say. I will help both of you speak.
Even though the thought of facing Pharaoh made him sick with fear, Moses traveled back to Egypt. And with Aaron's help, he spoke to the Israelites.
God will lead us out of Egypt.
Just as God promised, the Israelites believed Him, but they did have a few questions.
So Pharaoh's going to roll out the red carpet for us to leave?
I have to talk to him.
Together, Moses and Aaron approached the palace, the place where Moses had grown up. Moses could feel his throat tighten as they entered the vaulted throne room. Pharaoh sat high above them on his gold throne.
Tell him, the Lord says, let my people go. Then they will hold a feast to honor me in the desert.
Aaron repeated the words loudly and clearly, and the Pharaoh's eyes narrowed as he stared down.
Who is the Lord? Why should I obey Him?
Instead of releasing God's people, Pharaoh gave orders to make them work even harder. And the Israelites were not happy with Moses.
You aren't helping. You've messed things up even more.
Moses cried out to God.
I did what you asked, and now it's just worse. You haven't saved your people at all.
Still, the Lord told Moses and Aaron to return to Pharaoh.
Pharaoh will not listen to you, so I will show my power against the Egyptians. I will bring the Israelites out of Egypt.
Even though God performed several miraculous signs through Aaron and Moses in front of Pharaoh, the king still wouldn't listen. So the next morning, Aaron and Moses met Pharaoh down by the Nile River.
You sure he's coming?
It's what God said. There he is with all his officials. Here's what God says to say and what to do.
The brothers confronted Pharaoh, and Aaron said and did just as God had commanded Moses.
The Lord has sent me to you. He says, "Let my people go." But you have not listened. Here is how you will know I am the Lord.
Aaron raised his staff high.
I will strike the water with this walking stick. The river will turn into blood, the fish will die, and no one will be able to drink the water.
But Moses nodded to Aaron, and his older brother struck the water with his staff. Immediately, the river turned to dark red blood. But still, Pharaoh wouldn't let God's people go.
What's with this guy?
But the story wasn't over yet. God spoke to Moses again.
Go back to Pharaoh. Oh boy.
Again and again, Moses and Aaron appeared before Pharaoh to speak God's words.
Let my people go.
Over and over, Pharaoh promised to let God's people go. And every time he went back on his word, even though God sent frogs, followed by gnats and then flies. All the Egyptians' cattle died. Terrible sores showed up all over the Egyptians and their animals.
Ow!
Hail rained down, destroying crops and tearing leaves off of trees. Locusts finished off anything that the hail left behind. Then, deep darkness descended upon the land for 3 days. And finally, the worst plague of all. The oldest son of every Egyptian family died. And only the Israelite families were saved by painting the blood of a lamb above their doorframe, just as God had told them to do. When Pharaoh saw the terrible thing that had happened, he called out to Moses.
Get out of here. All of you. Just leave us alone. Go.
The Egyptians were so ready to get rid of the Israelites, they even gave them gold and silver and clothes to take with them.
No time to bake your bread. Just bring the dough along.
God's people packed up in the middle of the night and left as quickly as they could, leading their flocks and herds. Hundreds of years after the Israelites had arrived in Egypt, God spoke through Moses in spite of his fears. And now, God's people were finally free from slavery.